Hi there guys, so in this video we will take a look at WordPress security, validation, escaping and sanitizing data. So throughout WordPress plugins and themes, you'll see the uses of these standard functions and methods, which is how we basically secure multiple parts of code in WordPress. Right, so let me go through my setup here. So what I have right now is a demo plugin setup and a demo environment. I hope that you have a similar setup done. And I'm also using this http dump.app site to dump the requests that we will be sending over AJAX. So just so that you know what AJAX is. If you don't, there's also another video on my channel if you want to watch that out beforehand. Let's take a look at the code in our demo plugin. So here's the demo plugin. It's a bare bones single file. It just registers a demo plugin with the name demo plugin and a menu, and I have added a basic form and an AJAX action which processes the form data and saves it in database, right? So again, this is also, if you don't know how to do this, there's also in that video I have gone through how the AJAX methods work and how you can save data in the database via forms, right? So moving on, let's take a look into that demo menu page. Here it is. So we have three inputs here, the full name, email, and a license key. This is just for demo purposes. You can have any kind of inputs here, but we'll be basically doing it for a text and an email and a license key input. So basically this will be our demo data set for testing out these standards for validation, escaping and sanitizing. So first of all, let's begin with escaping, because I think escaping is actually no, let's begin with validation, because validation comes first and then escaping and then sanitization, right? So you'd assume that validation is something that you do when you have a form. You'd basically be filtering out any sort of data that you don't want, and that will be called validation. If you know the data is some sort of a specific data, such as a number or a text, or a predefined a finite number of data. So let's take a look at validating data documentation from WordPress. So we have a quick summary here. Untrusted data comes from many sources, users, third-party sites. All right, so this will be a common thing. So the common agenda for all these topics is to filter or sanitize or escape data for data coming from these sources, such as users, third-party sites, or the database itself. Right, so this data can be anything, and this is why we have these three separate methods and how we can process the data depending on the data we have, right? So the first one being validation. So validation is a process of testing data against a predefined pattern. Note that it is if you know that the data, what the data will be, such as a set of names, and you know that it will only be one of those patterns, and then it can't be anything other than that, then that will be a validation call. And you can also set it for other kinds of data inputs, so we'll take a look into that. So let's just jump right into the code. Before that, let's take a look at our menu form again. We have the menu form, and when you enter something here, it will basically get saved in the database right away, right? So let's take a look and let's enter something here. So scroll down there and an email, and let's just enter any random key in the license field and hit submit. It will also save the data into the database and then redirect us back to the same form. As you can see, just did that. And it will dump the same data which we sent into this API, this request server, right? So let's take a look into our form, which is this, and it is at first we have the admin URL for AJAX, and we are adding that in the form action parameter, and this is basically simple HTML form, and then we are just outputting our PHP data, right? And then we have the AJAX to handle that action which this form sends, and where we have this remote post function which basically just sends some data to an URL. In our case it is HTTP down, and we have the request global which will have the form data, right? So we have an option prefix because in WordPress, if you were to save something, you most likely want to have a prefix or some sort of a scoping, right? So that it doesn't get mixed up with the global data. So we are again using an update option function, which is a core method function, helper function to save an option in the DB, which is in the options table. And then we are using a save redirect to redirect us back to the same admin page, which is the menu page, right? So let's, in terms of validation, as I mentioned earlier, that it needs to be a predefined set of pattern, and that we know that what's gonna be there, and if that doesn't happen, we can just simply exit out of that scenario. So in terms of validation for this specific form, we know that the full name will have to be a text, or the email has to be an email, or let's just say when the form submits, we can have a validation at home. So validation and escaping and sanitization respectively can be set at any place, but you'd want to have it in a way that they both work simultaneously in a sync, such as in the form you would basically have escaping, and in the form submit you would want to have validation first and then sanitization, because right. So let's first look into the form submit method. In the AJAX action, we have the request global, but then before all of that we want to do is basically check if the to global request variable has some data or the data we want, right? So we can check that in a if conditional. This is very vague. You would not want to do that in production, because I'm going to go through how you can improve this further for production, but let's just take a look at this first. So request, and then you'd have that in say we have a full name, an email, and a license. So suppose we want strictly the license parameter to be filled, so we want to have license, and then if not license, we're gonna exit it out. So when this exit function runs, suppose when the request license, let's just be very explicit, let's use strict comparison, and then say if there's nothing, the string is empty for license, we're gonna exit out. And what this will do is it will exit out at form submission if the license field is empty. Let's try that out, right? You will see yes, it just throws a blank page. Let's go back to our page and improve it a bit, and we can simply say now the die and show a message here, but the die is not a recommended way to go about it. So what you'd want to do is send an error, so that will be a JSON error, and then there will be send JSON error. In that function, we want to provide a mixed data. It could be anything, a string or an array, and then in a message we can simply say invalid data. Now this will return back a JSON if the license field is empty. So let's try that. As you can see here, it just returns a JSON. And this is formatting. So I have a function, a extension that is being used to format the JSON into human readable format. So let's take a look at raw data. So this will look like this. And if you were to try it in Postman or some other API, Right. Okay, so let's go back to our menu page, and this was one way to handle validation, but validation can be any sort of conditional check, or a switch check, or an in-array check, where you know that some sort of data will always be that or one of that, and then you would attach it before saving the data or before doing any action with or for that data. So that is validation in a nutshell. And again, we'll take a look at validation. So there's also nonces in WordPress. So let's take a look at nonces. What are nonces? So nonces are a number used once. In general, this is a formula used throughout the web, but in WordPress, it's a hashed function. It's a hashed value. So suppose you have numbers and letters mixed into a hash form, and then this will be used to validate a URL, an action or a request, that it is from the same site and not from some other malicious website, right? So as mentioned in the course itself, that this is not the very safest way to handle everything, but still you can use this, and most times most plugins will be using nonces, and they have been. But again, if you want to have some sort of data manipulation from a user input, you also want to have permission functions as well, such as the current user can, as for the recommended way. So let's keep that in mind. And moving on, a nonce is used with forms, specifically forms, because forms send data, and that data can be verified if the nonce is there, that the form data being sent is from the same site, right? So in WordPress, how you can attach a nonce value in forms is by using the first use our PHP codes, and then we can use the nonce field in the form, and the nonce field, and the parameter it takes is the action name for the nonce, and we can call it demo plugin form for this example. And by the way, this echoes itself, so you don't need to echo it separately, right? So what this will do is basically add a nonce field, and it will be hidden, so it's not shown to the end user. And if we were to take a look, here it is with the ID and the name underscore with the nonce, and another being the HTTP reference. So this comes along with it. I'll show you what is the use of this in a bit. So we have the nonce. Now you were to send the data. So as you can see here, this is from our previous request. It has action, full name, email, and the license. Now we also have one more field, that is, two more fields, that is the nonce and the HTTP reference. So if we were to now send the data, so we have this pre-filtered data, and then hit submit, we'll see that in this we have the typing nonce value, which is the hashed value we just talked about. Again, I will mention the link to this documentation in the video description, so that you can take a look in all the ways you can create the nonces and use them, because there are multiple ways to use nonces. For this part, we will be using the form way, and I'll also show you how you can use in the URL. So we have the nonce field. Now let's take a look at how we can use it for data validation. Now, why do I mention data validation? Because again, we know that it is an expected value, and we can check for it because it is already in the WordPress database, and it will just verify for that hashed value, right? So we will again book it into an if conditional, and then we will use check AJAX referrer, and then the action name which we used here. So you're gonna maybe save that in a constant or something, and then we can say that if this is incorrect, let's again send an error. So this would be an expected way, not by the way I showed you earlier, by directly checking for the request global inside the request globals, because before all that you would first need to check for the nonce value. In most WordPress forms, you'd want to do this first. And then we'll just again send the same message, send invalid data, right? Okay, so now if we were to take a look, this will simply work because we have the correct nonce, right? But if we were to simply ignore this, if we were to simply remove this, let's just say let's remove it, and we were to refresh the page and hit submit again, you'll see that it shows -1 because there's simply no nonce available there. And check AJAX referral expects a nonce value to be there. So if a person tries to even duplicate it in a way that, like, let's just say, let's provide an input and let's type, let's just name it, and then being nonce, and then the value, we can just give it any number or anything, right? And then it's saved and refresh it. Okay, so this is being visible right now. Let's just give it hidden. I've already hidden. Now if you were to hit submit, okay, it says that again. We'll just double check. Basically, you get the idea that it will throw an error in any case if the AJAX doesn't match the variable set via the WordPress core. Alright, so this is one simple way to just get over the validation part for forms. But you would have multiple validation parts for each sort of data you want to filter out, do an action for. Again, we will have multiple inputs here, so let's clear out the requests in the request dim. And then, okay, so as I was earlier mentioning about the HTTP referrer, which the WP nonce field generated. So let's take a look how that helps us now. Okay, right, here it is. So HTTP referrer. Now, if you were to go here in the save reader, you can see that we have manually typed an URL to go back to, and this is where the HTTP referrer comes in. And then we can simply hook into our global variable and look into HTTP referrer, which is the WP HTTP referrer. And now if you were to hit submit, it will again take us back to the same page, because now it gets the URL from the page itself, right? We don't have to manually enter it. So this is a much handy way to redirect an AJAX form, by the way. So moving on, so that's the validation part. Let's move on to the escaping, etc. So there are many escaping functions, by the way. You can take a look at the escaping functions at this developer wordpress.org handbook. I will also attach the link for this page in the video description. So let's take a look for our use case here for this video. That is the full name and the email and the license. So in this case, we want to take a look at all the form data, and we'll have to make sure that how escaping should be implemented here. So let's take a quick read at this. So escaping output is the process of securing output data by stripping out unwanted data, like malformed HTML or script tags. So as you saw, it said the output data. So you would imagine any data that will be rendered on the front end, that will be your output data. So in this case, we have a URL, and then we have our inputs, where we are also outputting some value from database. So this is where we want to escape the data. For some reason, my PHP is alright. Yeah, it's back. So you can see it's throwing this warning. All output should be run through an escaping function or found AJAX URL. So it knows that this is being output and it wants us to escape the data before outputting it. So in terms of an AJAX URL, we would be using there should be I know what function I have to use, but I just want to show you guys all the functions available. Okay, so so here are them, escaping functions. So we'll be using escape URL, using all URLs, including those in the source and the href attributes. So there are others as well. So escape URL, or when storing a URL in the database, escape XML to escape XML plus. Alright, we'll basically be using escape URL because we are not storing in the database, we're just outputting. So this, this, and now you'll see that the PHP warning is now gone. Again, I'm using PHP according standard formatter. You can use that as well. I have a video on that in my channel. If you want to do that, go watch that video. Alright, moving on. The second, in the input values, we have some sort of text data, and in all this data, all we want to do is basically strip out HTML tags or struct tags. So in all cases, what we want to do is basically we have an escape HTML. Use anytime an HTML element encloses a section of data being displayed. So basically this is for mostly for use such as enclosing of an HTML tag in between, but not for these attributes. So these are about HTML attributes. So for that, we have escape attribute use on anything else that's printed into an HTML elements attribute. So let's just use attribute. So this will strip out everything, including HTML entities, I suppose. If not, there is also a function for that. Alright, let's just quickly apply one of our inputs here in data, and then we'll see that it's being CS will stop asking us to do anything about it, because that is being handled away. So let's not reference this, let's reference this. Now, if you were to enter anything else, it will get stripped out. Suppose you were to enter this, but this will be stripped out in a way that this will be shown as it is, but it will be in the entity span, suppose. Let's try that. Yeah, you can see it's being shown us like this, like we entered it, but it would take a look into aspect. Yeah, so don't think this will work. Let's try that. Scrolling and outputting another value here, saying hidden, right? Let's try that. As you can see, it just stripped down the closing double quote, and it showed us like this. So you can't basically get away with any sort of script joking with the font, right? So that's about escaping and how you can handle escaping in forms. I think again, you can use this anywhere where the data is being outputted in the front end. So like that. So we just saw how you can use escaping function to escape data in WordPress code, etc. Now we can take a look at sanitization. So sanitization is a way to sanitize data before basically saving the data in the database. But you can use sanitize functions and validation functions and escaping function wherever you want, most likely, because in case if a validation function or escaping function is not enough for your use case, you can use a sanitization function as well. But in a more specific where the data is not specific, such as where we saw in validation, where we could say that the data we already know what the data is, you can use sanitization. So let's take a look. At the moment, we are basically, again, all right, so we missed one part here, that is the for each function. We're basically simply saving everything in the request global, and that is not the most efficient way to save something, because we know that the kind of data we want to save, and then we only want to save that data. So let's implement a validation, right? So what you'd want to do is let's apply a condition where we have an in array. And in array, let's first put our update option in the if conditional, and in array takes 3 parameters. So one being the needle, which we want to check for which will be our key, and the second being the haystack, in which we want to check the needle for. And the haystack is, we want to have an array here, and then we'll say full name, because we will want to check for these 3 inputs, and we only want to save these in the database. We don't want to save anything else. Email and the license, right? So now when only these cases match, then only it will save it in the database. So this is again a case for validation, how you can use validation. And you can also separate this global variable and improve it. So escape it, sanitize it before simply using it. So let's just say keys, and then what you want to do is basically there's a function called wp unslash. It is used mostly for unslashing global request data, and in case it has some slashes, etc. So there's all kinds of functions available for this. You can take a look at how you can escape global variables. Maybe I'll make another video into that, but let's just know that you will also need to format and filter out your form sent data before saving it in the database. So you can use escaping or saving it in a separate variable for all sort of data, right? Moving on, where we were looking at the sanitization functions. So sanitization, again, like I said, it will come to this part where I was just mentioning the request global, where we have the request data. You basically want to sanitize the data before saving it in the database. So we have the update option method, and we are basically directly saving it in the database without any sort of sanitization. But again, we have the escaping functions in case, so this will not be something that like it can get away, but still you want to have sanitization in place. So let's take a look at all kinds of sanitization options we have. We have sanitize text field, we have sanitize email, there's all kinds of sanitization options available here. And we'll only be looking at few, and then you can take a look at all these. I'll just mention the link in the video description. They all have very well documented code, so you will not have any problem understanding what each of them will do, right? So the most general function in this sanitization standardization is the sanitize text field, because this is in case you don't know what the data is. So such as when the text field is text itself, and then you don't know what will it be. So it is too general, like it says. Where so let's take out. We can simply either just say that in the value field, sanitize text field, sanitize text field, and then take the value and hit. So this will basically save every data that comes in the text field format. And this is not again wrong. It won't do any harm to any of these, because an email can be a text, and a license can be a text as well. But you'd want to be precise if you want your data sanitization to be perfect. So in most cases, if you were to do that, what you want to do is sanitize it beforehand. So let's just say we have a separate array. We'll call it sanitized data, right? Or sanitized keys. Let's just save it. Let's keep that in an empty array. And then what we want to do is, if this array, let's do that separately in the keys where we have full name, email, and license. What we'll want to do is let's let's keep it there, and then we'll be using the sanitized keys here, right? But we want to have the sanitized keys to have the correct data, right? So let's take a look at sanitized keys, and then we want to say full name here. We'll do full name, and then in full name we will look at, we will go about keys, and then full name again. I know this is not the very standard code you'd want to write, but just be with me for a second. So we have the keys full name, and then as you'll expect, this will have the value here, but you'd want to sanitize it. So you will use sanitized text field, and then wrap this in the function. So you have the full name variable, the full name key in the sanitized keys. Again, you will do the same for each of these options we have. Let me just copy paste email, and we have license. So in terms of email, we'll use the sanitized email function, and we will use your sanitized key. So remember, key is for license because you want to check. It also depends on the way your key is being generated. So you want to check what sanitized key function does, but in most cases, sanitized key will handle license as well. Let's update our values here and license. Now we have sanitized the keys, perfectly sanitized with the data. Now we can simply save it in the database and remove it from the sanitize function, remove from the data option, right? So this will now work efficiently. Let me just format it a bit, right? So this is how you would use the sanitization functions as well. Now there will be cases where you won't have an escaping function or validation or an sanitization function for your use case. So suppose you have some sort of data that is not available from these functions and cannot filter out. So in such cases, you'd want to use WP cases, right? Where WP cases can filter out text content and HTML as well. So it can even allow some sort of some HTML and the HTML you want to allow, right? So WP cases, as the name, if the name is very confusing for non-WordPress developer, because or any seasoned developer as well, I think, because it goes way back. I recently got to know about the name as well. So the WP cases stands for, it's basically used for XSS scripts or XSS attacks, cross-site scripting basically. So WP cases is for cases, strips, evil scripts. So WP cases, scripts, evil scripts. And again, this is very vague, but you can assume that this will allow you to basically filter out HTML content. So you would want to have some sort of HTML echoed, and the PHP CSS is throwing a warning for outputting any HTML. So this is basically directly outputting the HTML, but if you want to say output echo this. This is very simple and there's no error, but if you'd have a ton of HTML and you not know what else can get in, so you'd want to have the WP cases, and the WP cases works like this. It will take the content, so maybe you'll have, let's just say WP cases. What you'll have is this, So the first one being the content, and the second one being an array of allowed HTML elements. So you can take a look at, there will be some documentation commented out by users, but you can assume the first element of the array being the HTML element, and such as say div, and in the element you can add as many arrays as you want. An empty array will mean only the HTML element, and you can go in depth into that array and add additional elements, and that will be your HTML attributes. So such as you can say a class attribute, or an ID attribute, like that. So this is how that works. Again, you can take a look at all of that, and the documentation is very well documented. This will not be any confusing. If at all it is, please do mention in a comment, and I'll make that in a video, separate video, how I can help you with that. So this will be it for sanitization, escaping, and validation with nonces as well. So hope this video helps you, and if it does, please do subscribe and hit the like button. I'm working on more content like this and more on WordPress and web dev in general. So if you are into that sort of stuff, please subscribe. And with that note, peace and have a good day.